Hello and welcome to ESL Revolution, everyone. I am your content creator and professor, Dr. B. Welcome back and happy Wednesday to you all. That's right, it is Wednesday, June 24th. I hope you're all doing very well. This is the third video in what is actually becoming kind of a new little mini series on my channel, talking about international marriage, interracial couples, that sort of thing. And of course, this topic is coming from my good friend Muyang, who is married to one of my good friends, Nate. They are living in Malta and coming back to Korea, I'm hoping sooner rather than later, even though COVID is kind of holding them up a little bit in terms of their travel plans. I do wish that you guys come here as soon as you can. It'd be great to see you again. And of course, you're always welcome to come and visit our place. So the first two videos, as just a recap, the first one was on the issue of cultural DNA and how that embedded culture kind of right inside us has the potential to create conflict with an international coupled partner, because generally speaking, those two cultures really are quite different, or can potentially be quite different. So that's the first one. The second thing we talked about in video number 2 was the idea of education and what or how my wife and I worked in terms of raising our kids, and gave a couple of examples that my wife and I are both teachers. So we talked about that in the second video. The third video today is the other topic that Muyong had suggested, which is essentially how do we deal with discipline in an international home. Now, this is the one I feel, if there's any video that I produce for either my friends out there or my students, this one is probably going to get me into trouble the most. And I don't think that's the case. But you know, I can see the potential for problems, because discipline is such a touchy issue in so many different parts of the world. So I'm going to be perfectly upfront and honest about the way that I do things and how my wife and I have developed our discipline. So here we go. Discipline starts with very important conversations between you as partners before the discipline is meted out to the children that you have. Because if you don't talk about what discipline is going to be leveled against your children, and I don't mean leveled as like leveling a hammer or whatever, not always, just any kind of discipline that is being used, those things need to be discussed first and foremost between you and your partner. Because if you do not do that, you're going to have some pretty big fundamental problems. And one issue that arises is if partner A is disciplining and partner B doesn't agree with that and makes it known in front of the children that they don't agree with that, then that will, in essence, remove part of the authority that the parent has in that situation. And that is not a good, I don't think that's a particularly wise approach, because one partner is going to constantly undermine the authority of the other and vice versa. So being aware of that, I think, is the first thing that is really important when coming to the issue of discipline. Now, discipline is ultimately a last resort. It is not your primary resort. And the reason I say that is because there are other things that you should be doing first before consequences are meted out. So, let me explain what I mean by that. I'm going to use an example, and this is a kind of a funny story, but I think in some ways it illustrates the difference in how my wife and I actually deal with discipline. So, before we had kids, we had two dogs, Cocker Spaniels, Jack and Ruby. If you know that, if you understand that reference, good for you. Put a comment below and let me know if you do. So, dogs, for those of you who have dogs or know about dogs, dogs respect the alpha, all right? The person that's in charge. And if they don't respect or they don't see that person as an alpha, it's going to take much longer for you to deal with the dog in a disciplinary capacity or an instructional capacity. So, I remember having this conversation with my wife. It was really funny. We both laughed at it, and she kind of agreed, in terms of this. So, I'm not saying anything that she doesn't know already. One of the funny things that would happen is with Jack and Ruby, my wife would be dealing with them and wanting them to do something, let's say to sit down before they eat, or something like that. Let's say she's got the bowls of food there. She'd be going, Jack, Ruby, sit down. Jack, Ruby, sit down. Jack, Ruby, sit down. And they wouldn't. Their tails would be wagging and they wouldn't sit down. I would come over, look at them. Jack, Ruby, sit. And they would sit down. Now, that is a condition. It's a conditioning. But also, it's the idea of an alpha behavior. Now, I don't mean alpha behavior as in, oh, he's an alpha male, blah, blah, blah. He's so strong. And that's not what I'm referring to, okay? That's not what I'm referring to here. And in fact, I've read some articles a couple years ago saying that the alpha beta male doesn't even exist. So quite interesting. But anyway, that's a tangent. We won't get into that. But for the dogs, they responded to my authority in those situations in a way that they did not respond to the authority of my wife. Now, why do I bring that analogy up? Why do I bring that story up? Because, to be quite honest, having raised dogs and two little kids, there's some similarity there, to be quite honest. I'll be quite honest, there is some similarity. Now, kids are going to respond to you in a way that is based on fairness and is also based on boundary. And I think a boundary and establishing those boundaries very purposefully between you and your partner, like this is where that conversation comes into it, where as parents, you need to know this is okay. This is not okay. And then those things need to be discussed with the children. And at any age, those things need to be discussed. Once the kids start talking, their ability to absorb information goes up as well. And so from a very young age with June, I was very clear to him, and I mean young. I mean, within, at a year and a half, those boundaries were starting to be put in place. And even before that, I would imagine they would be put in place in some way, shape, or form. And those boundaries are what you as parents create for them. And those boundaries become the rule box and the toolbox by which you use to help direct and control your kids. So, and there is a certain measure of control that is required by us as parents over the kids. And I'm not talking about things that are dominating, like you don't dominate your children. Not in that. That's not what I'm referring to. Again, I got to be very careful here. I got to choose my words carefully, but I need to show what I'm talking about. And so, in a situation where they are working within the boundaries that you've set, there's no problem. There's no discipline problem. However, in a situation where one of the children, in my case, June or Sumin, is pushing up that boundary a little bit, a warning is given. And only one. This is the way I do it. I only give one warning because they know what the boundaries are. And kids will test your boundaries all the time. And if you don't stick to your boundaries, they know that they can just do anything that they want. And that is a recipe for future disaster, which we're going to talk about. So when you are in a situation, you create the boundary between you and your wife, then you inform the children of what the boundaries are. What are the rules that they should be abiding by? And those can, there's no perfect rules. That's going to be up to you as a parent and as a couple. As parents, that's going to be what you decide. So I can't tell you what those rules are, but a boundary is necessary. And I'll give you some examples of what those are in a few minutes. So you set up the boundary, and the children then know what those boundaries are. And if they move up against the boundaries, you could give them a verbal warning. Hey, by the way, remember that sort of thing's not allowed. You might want to change your behavior. Now, this is something that I do all the time. You might want to change your behavior. You have a choice. You have a choice. You can either continue down the path that you are going to continue down upon and consequences will be given to you, or you can turn around and change your behavior to do something different where those consequences will not be given against you, right? Now, why do I give choices, or why do I indicate that a choice is necessary? Because it empowers them. It puts the emphasis of control in the child's hands, and it helps them to understand at a very young age that choices matter. Choices matter. And if we can teach them at a young age that choices matter, they will grow up. As they grow up, they will understand that concept as their boundary gets bigger, because as we grow up, those boundaries do get bigger. And the types of boundaries that we have when they're 3 years old are not necessarily the type of boundaries that we have when they're 8 years old, because they don't need them anymore. They've moved past the need for that particular boundary. Now, let me just say here, by the way, I am in no way a professional in this. I'm not a child psychologist. Okay, I've done a little reading, of course, to understand this stuff. But let me just say that I don't have that background. So please, I don't lambaste me on that point. This is just how I handle things personally. But choices are important. Choices empower your kids to learn what is both positive and negative. If they are moving toward that boundary line and you give them that warning, and they decide, oh yeah, I remember doing this before and it wasn't very nice, then they're going to hopefully turn around and not engage in a behavior that goes past the boundary that you guys have set. On the flip side, if they decide, no, I'm, maybe not willfully, but they're just going to continue along that path, once that boundary is crossed, then it's our job as a parent to make sure we enforce that boundary. And whatever type of discipline you measure out for that, for that crossing of the boundary, whatever it is. Now it could be, it could be something, a minor type of discipline. It could be something a little bit more major that you deal with. Again, that is totally up to you on how you want to go about doing that. So boundaries and choices do work together. Let me give you an example. One of the things that my wife and I both agree upon is that my kids will not be getting any kind of technology, a tablet, a cell phone specifically, at all while they are in elementary school. Absolutely not. They don't need it. It's not necessary. Even though I am a proponent of like a hybrid classroom in other videos I've talked about, I am a proponent of that. I think it's valuable. A hybrid classroom doesn't always mean technology, okay? Take a look for that video. It doesn't always mean technology. It's a way of doing things that's different, but that's for another topic. So when the kids were younger, I would take them to Home Plus or Emart. That's kind of like the Korean version of, your food store, right? Your big box store that you go to buy food in, wherever that might be. So before we left the house, I would explain to them what the boundary rules are for being at one of these stores. The rules are very simple. We are not going there to buy things for you. We are going there to buy food. End of story. If there is something that you want and you point it out to me, I will probably not buy it. Why? Because it's probably not something good for you in the first place. Like Lucky Charms or Captain Crunch or something, that sort of thing. We've got pretty strict rules for food, so that typically is what the conversation is about. Or if we happen to go past the toy aisle and they say, "Oh, can we go down and see this?" Blah blah blah. I usually say no, because that will just get us into a whole world of trouble, or it used to anyway. And then, so they know from the very beginning when we leave that we're going for specific things and that what you want is not on that list. When we get there, I do a second check in the car before we get out. June and Sumin, what is it that we are here for? And then they give the answer. And then I'll say, Sumin, are you allowed to buy stuff? Are you allowed to point things out that you want to buy? No. June, can you give me an example of what that means? Blah, blah, blah. Yes, and he would give me an example. So those things are set. Then we get out of the car, we get the cart, and we go inside. Now, these days, I would say, typically, we don't have a problem. They get into the cart, maybe I'll push them along. What I find most frustrating is they get in and out, in and out, in and out while I'm trying to get stuff. So that's a problem, but it's not a huge deal. What used to happen is this. Oh, hang on before we get. So I would also remind them while we're in the car, what is the consequence for your if you start throwing a temper tantrum because there's something that you want, and you start getting fussy and whiny and you start getting the little alligator tears, then what's the consequence to that? The consequence is we are immediately going to be leaving Home Plus. And I don't care whether I've got a grocery cart full of food, we're leaving. Period. End of story. And that's something that they don't want because they actually like going there. So I know that that's something that, because it's kind of an exciting little field trip that they can go on, especially when they go with me. And it's kind of like a daddy kid type day. And it's great. I enjoy it too. But they know that throwing that kind of temper tantrum or that little fussiness is immediately going to be a consequence factor. So we go in. Now these days we don't really have any problems with that. June and Sumin might ask for something. It's like, oh, Daddy, can we have some nuts, for example? Now in that case, if I know that we need walnuts, then I say, oh yeah, we can get some walnuts because we need some. Thanks for reminding me. In that case, it's no problem. But if they start saying, hey, can we get a bag of gummy bears or whatever, I'm going to say, no, we can't. And if there's any kind of like starting like that, they know what that consequence is going to be. So that doesn't happen very often. Let me tell you how I handled that with June when he was about 2 or 3 years old. I was telling him this at 2 or 3 years old, so he knew what the consequence was. We went in there one time and he started giving me he started throwing a temper tantrum. He was in the front, the little, you got the cart, and he was right in front of me sitting in that little chair thing. We were collecting food and he started throwing a temper tantrum. And it was quite a bad one. I picked him up and there was a worker there, and I said, I'm sorry, he's crying so much. I need to leave my cart here. Is that okay? And they were like, yeah, no problem. We'll put it away. And I picked him up and walked out of Home Plus. And he was screaming the entire way. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Right? But he was throwing a temper tantrum and I wasn't going to allow that. And I put him into the car, buckled him into the seat, and I started the car and we drove away. And he was crying up until the point where we walked away, or up until the point where we got in the car. I started driving away, and out of the parking lot, and he started to like slowly calm down. And he said, let's go back, and I won't cry anymore. It's like, no, it's too late. Sorry, you threw your temper tantrum in the place. We're done. We're going home. And he wasn't happy about that. He didn't like that. He didn't like the fact that consequences were turned on him. So we went back, and in the car between he and I, we talked about what had happened. We went home, problem resolved. A few weeks later, we went back again. Same thing happened. He threw a temper tantrum in Home Plus, and what did I do? Picked him up, took him out, walked away. This time, he stopped crying while we were on the way to the car. Not in the car, on the way to the car. Daddy, I won't cry. I'm sorry, I won't cry, I'll cry. No, sorry, it's too late. Can't do that. And I put him in the car, buckled him in, and we went home. And a little while later, 3 or 4 weeks later maybe, we went back again. Nothing happened. There was no temper tantrum. He was happy. We were fine. We got my food. We got the food for the family. We went home. He was great. And I praised him for his good behavior. And I asked him, why? Why were we able to stay? Well, because I didn't cry. Bingo, exactly. And that solved the problem. And now we don't have any problems like that. Because the boundary was enforced, and it was an actual boundary that he crossed, the consequence was meted out. We left immediately, and there was no discipline other than the fact that we left, because that's what I told him would happen. Now, interestingly enough, Suman really didn't have that problem because she learned from June. She saw the fact that we would just leave immediately, and she decided, oh, I better not do that because I don't want to do that. So Suman learned from June's example. And Suman, I think I might have done it once, but typically Suman was okay. So June tested the boundaries to see whether I was serious about that rule. I was. Problem resolved. That's what I mean by boundaries being so important, because it tells your children exactly what is and is not acceptable in any particular given situation. So that is something that before discipline is even given, those boundaries and those types of discussions that you have with your kids are probably going to be probably about 80% effective, in my opinion, about 80% effective in terms of most things that come up that need to be dealt with. You made a mess in your room, you don't get dinner until you clean it up. Go in there. They don't come out until then. If they wait an hour and they're humming and hawing in the room, the dinner's getting cold and they get hungry. Eventually they decide, oh, yeah, I'm hungry. Let's clean this up. And then they come out and they show me the room. It's clean. Okay, great. Thank you. Now you can eat. Right? Again, that's a boundary that they need to have in order to get something that they need, their dinner. They also know that I have no problems taking away their dinner because I've done it before. If you continue, again, they get close to a boundary problem. There's some kind of a problem. They're not doing it. I say, if you don't do X, you're going to lose your dinner. And then, there's been a couple times when June has or Suman has lost their dinner because they decided they didn't want to do it. Okay, that's fine. My wife, on the other hand, she was one of those people that didn't want to take dinner away. And I told her, look, if they lose their dinner, they're not, they go hungry for a meal, they're not gonna die. It's not gonna be any problem to their body. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. So we had a back and forth about that issue, but it did get, we do use it in the tool, in the repertoire for discipline, should we need it. Timeouts are another really good one. They're doing something, you give them a warning, they keep doing it, boom, timeout. You over there, no talking. And if they talk or if they do something during their timeout, June, you get 1 extra minute. Oh, you're still talking, you're still smiling, 2 extra minutes. And then they know that the timeout is serious and it's not a joking matter. And then eventually it's like, oh wait, yeah, I can't do this. And then because of that, I would let Suman out earlier because she's not doing anything. It's like, okay, Suman, your 5 minutes is up, and June's still in the timeout because he had those extra 2 minutes or whatever. So that's, again, another way that those boundaries and discipline measures can work together to negate most of, I think, the discipline problems that might arise. I'm not going to get into the issues of corporal punishment in this video. I don't want to. I'm not going to tell you what I think about that. I will leave that for you as individual parents to judge the efficacy of that. If you want to, if you don't want to, that's up to you. I'm not going to give you my personal opinions about it. I don't want to sway you one way or the other. If you have a particular way of dealing with it, that's fine, no problem. Do I have behavior problems with my kids these days? Yes, of course I do. That would, who doesn't? But that being said, I do find that those boundary rules have really helped with creating those patterns of good behavior going forward. That, yes, they do go at loggerheads together. They do fight with each other. That's fine. there are times when, if I know that June is constantly picking on Sumin, I give permission to Sumin to say, you have my permission to defend yourself, and I'm not going to get mad at you for doing it. So you got to take care of yourself. June's being a little bit of a bully right now. How are you going to deal with that? And I give them permission. I'm not saying that we should fight our bullies, but there may be time and place for that, and they're going to need to learn those skills. How do they deal with that? There are multiple ways of doing that. And what's funny is if June is picking on Sumin and I say that, June stops, because June knows he'll get hurt, and he doesn't want that. So his behavior immediately is resolved because I've given permission to do that. So again, that's another little tool that you can use, that I use at least in my repertoire, to navigate behavior. Now, let me just talk about one other thing with regard to technology and behavior. There have been a ton of studies, and I mean a ton of studies, on the negative impact of cell phones, tablets, and television on kids' ability to have internal behavior management. If you want to start looking that up, I would highly recommend it. I can't even count the number of parents I've seen with their kids at a store or whatever, and the kids are eyeballs deep into their parent's cell phone because they're watching a cartoon or something, or they're playing a game on their cell phone. That sort of behavior, that sort of way of controlling, will do zero for their future. And this is something that I will tell any parent out there: if this is what you're doing, you need to stop that now. It will have a really negative impact on your child's development. Your child will not be able to separate themselves from that technology. They will in turn throw a temper tantrum, and what often happens is the parent will immediately give the cell phone back or the tablet back to control the behavior. But what that does is it reinforces the behavior of, if I cry, if I throw a temper tantrum, parents will do X and give it back to me. And that in the long run is going to spell disaster. And I know that because I've seen that personally working over the last 15 years. I've seen that kind of behavior coming up constantly in elementary school when I used to teach it. And if you are, as a parent, doing that now, please reevaluate that immediately. It is really, really important. And it is not doing your kids any good whatsoever to kind of engage in that kind of cell phone temper tantrum type behavior. I'll give you an example. This was maybe last year. This is the one that I think was really quite interesting. So, actually, I'm going to give you two examples. The first example was my wife and I and the kids were at a restaurant in outside of Daegu. Lovely little place. We had somebody had introduced my wife to, so we went there. It was nice. We had a good time. And there was, we were sitting at a table of 4, and then there was, so I was sitting here, and my wife was here, and my 2 kids were here, and behind my wife, so I could see the table, there was like a table of 8 or 10. It was like a table of 10, but there was 8 people, 2 sets of parents, 2 sets of kids. So there were 2 moms, 2 dads, and 4 kids, or 5 kids. And as we were eating, what I noticed was all 5 kids had cell phones. Every kid had a cell phone. And they were just doing this. They weren't really interacting with each other. Occasionally they might look at each other and point or something like that, but they weren't really interacting with each other. The other thing that was unique was the parents were interacting with each other, and these kids were not little kids by any stretch. These were not like 2-year-old kids. Although I think there was one quite young little kid who also had a cell phone and, eyes deep on the cell phone too. And what would end up happening was the mom would turn and shove food in the kid's mouth. So it was more like that, right? Now, I was really quite upset actually that they would even be considering doing this. But of course, this is just the way it is. Parents don't think of, perhaps in this sense, they don't understand, or they don't know the long-term consequences. And if they do, they don't think about the fact that those consequences will be much worse than the early consequences. And so as we were talking, like the four of us were having a conversation. We were talking back and forth. June and I, Suman and Mom, we were talking back and forth. And my wife told me this afterwards, while we were eating. She kind of whispered over. She goes, "Those moms are talking about us." And I was like, "What? They're talking about us." It's like, yeah, they're talking about us. They're shocked that our kids and us are having conversations together and there's no cell phones at the table. They're utterly blown away. And it's like, oh my God, really? It's like, yeah, they're gobsmacked that this is actually occurring. And the parents are talking about what it is that we're doing. And they can't believe that we're able to have a dinner for an hour without the kids having any cell phones. So I asked my wife, I was like, do you think I should go over and talk to them about it? Because obviously there's clear interest there. And maybe this would be a really good way for me to engage the parents as to why we're doing certain things the way we are and what they can do to help them. And my wife is not that kind of person, right? She's like, oh no, you can't do that. It's it's so rude and blah blah blah. So we didn't. Me personally, if my wife wasn't there, I probably would have gone over and done that. Which leads me to my second story. So the second story was I was with my kids in like a Home Plus. We were doing food shopping. There was another kid that was near us, and the mom had to, and I, not too far away, like 10 feet away or something. And the mom needed the phone for something. And the little kid, probably like 3 years old, was again eyes deep into a cell phone, right? And the mom needed the phone, took the phone away for something, probably to either answer the phone or send a text message. Kid went ballistic, like that, just started throwing a temper tantrum, right? And what did the mom do? The mom acquiesced to the temper tantrum, gave the phone back, and that was the behavior. Now, what I did was, because my wife wasn't there this time, I went over to the mom and I talked to them. I said, do you realize how damaging what you're doing to your kid is? So damaging. And what you just did proves that you're damaging your child by giving the cell phone. And her English was, and I didn't care whether she understood or not, but I was letting her know how displeased I was. And it probably shouldn't do it anyway, but I don't care, because it really is something that is damaging to the children long term. So I said, if you keep giving your kids cell phones, they are going to keep throwing temper tantrums, and then you are going to keep giving cell phones, which is going to reinforce that behavior. And when they're in elementary school, or you're going to have a very, very difficult time to control them. And what you're doing now is setting them up and setting yourself up for immense conflict in the future. You've got to change your behavior. This is not a good thing to be doing. And she was shocked. She was shocked that I was doing that, and for right reason, because it's something that I do feel quite strongly against. So that's a couple of examples on how technology and discipline, and how technology actually nullifies discipline very quickly. And even if you have rules and you've got this thing in their kids' faces, you're going to have significant problems. So there's nothing more important than sitting down at a meal together and talking about what's going on. How are you feeling? What did you do today? Etc., etc. And it gives that family time, and it's so important. We don't have a lot of it, so take advantage of it. Get the cell phones put your cell phones in your pocket. don't let them have them, and deal with it a little bit better. So that was almost 40 minutes long in terms of discipline. So clearly I've got some stuff to say, but I do wish that post links down below. I'd be interested to know, is there any follow-up questions to this? I'll be more than happy to answer them in the YouTube channel. And if you've got any further ideas about this, then I would be really appreciative. Let me know what else you would like me to talk about, and I will, and I'll do that. So yeah, there you go. Good on you. Discipline 101 from Dr. B. There we go. I'm not an actual doctor, by the way. I just use that as my moniker, in case you were wondering. But yeah, that's it. I gotta go pick up Suman now at kindergarten. She's at daycare at kindergarten this morning. So I wish you all very well. Remember, be healthy, be safe, wear your masks when you go outside, and we'll see you again here at ESL Revolution. See you later. Have a nice day, everyone. Bye-bye.